Hello everybody, this is Cyrus doing a triple upload today. I think one reason I'm doing an extra upload today is because my videos this morning, I looked so sickly and pale. Did you see those? I think it's because I just woken up, the lighting was bad, my hair was messy. I don't know what it is. So let's do another video just to get those last videos out of our head. Because I want to talk about the stages of belief in an afterlife and why that really matters when we're in this community, especially for learning about what phase somebody may be in, and especially as a way to learn to have some extra patience with certain people and to not be surprised when people act a certain way toward particular areas of information that they're not ready yet to be able to absorb, so to speak. And before we get started, you are watching Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. I am Cyrus Kirkpatrick, and we talk about this topic here, life after death, but also supernatural subjects, metaphysical stuff, and a lot more coming in the future. So please hit the subscribe button, as it's the only way I can keep going with all this. So, what are the stages or the phases of belief in the afterlife? So phase 1 I call quantum stuff. But before we get to phase 1, there is a phase 0, which is non-belief. So people just they never think about it, they just buy into what mainstream materialists have to say. And oh yeah, as a quick side note, I noticed that anytime I do a video where I kind of poke at the materialist establishment, like I did a video where I was kind of burning on Neil deGrasse Tyson, not surprisingly those videos start to get dislikes. And I will ask that if you are one of the people disliking the videos, please post in the comments, because I want to hear kind of what your position is. So it's one thing just to dislike and scoff at something, but it's something else to kind of have the guts to go head to head with the information. So I do rip on some of these guys like Neil Tyson, and I will continue to rip on these people probably until I end up with my own page on Rational Wiki, which I think I'm going to post about later. But I also like to actually engage with the people who are such supporters of like materialist atheism, because my side of the aisle kind of has a lot of evidence, and I think I can put up a pretty good argument. So I don't always have the patience to argue on the internet, but sometimes every now and then I'm happy to go toe to toe with this subject. So again, if you disagree with what I have to say, feel free to post something about it. I want to hear you. I want to hear what you think. Okay. So to continue, so phase 0 is basically believing the materialists, believing Neil Tyson and all these guys. There's no afterlife. Science has it all figured out, and every single person, which is probably about 50% of everybody on the planet who's had some experience along these lines, is delusional. So that's the safe little bubble of atheist materialism that people spend a lot of their hashtag basic lives living in, afraid to step out of it until finally they do. And then you kind of squeeze into phase 1, which I call quantum stuff. This is when we basically say consciousness may have some extra properties. So I include hosts like Joe Rogan. Of course, Joe Rogan has like the most popular podcast, very entertaining show, and sometimes he brings on people in this category. Like he's even brought on people like Stephen Greer, the UFO researcher. He brings on consciousness researchers. He had a show called Joe Rogan Questions Everything. So he is also a paranormal investigator, and I've always been a Joe Rogan fan. I like what he does, but it's also kind of a stepping stone. So people begin thinking outside of the box with Joe's show. But Joe's also like a skeptic. So it's not likely he's ever going to go into the deep end of the pool and say, yo, I think that there's like really are aliens. I think there really is life after death. Look at all this evidence. He's kind of caught in that spiral of always needing more evidence. And if there is more evidence presented, it's like, well, this isn't good enough. I need more evidence. And that doesn't really end very often. So most people just stay in phase 1. So they may take seriously people like Stuart Hameroff, who theorizes that your consciousness maybe returns to the universe at death, but there's no specifics about what that means. I didn't include in this list, but there's spiritual leaders, people like Eckhart Tolle. They don't directly describe the afterlife, but they do say similar things about the consciousness isn't dependent on the brain. Maybe it can release back into the universe. Dean Radin has a lot of very scientific books. People at this phase may listen to people like Susan Blackmore, the skeptic, who always has some alternate explanation, but she's also a big proponent of like Zen Buddhism and consciousness states. Let's see, there's also somebody else who is along those same lines. Oh yeah, Sam Harris. So Sam Harris has actually stated, like in the End of Faith, he believes like ESP is real. He believes like meditation is a big part of our self-development, but he would never probably commit to like the literal afterlife because it's almost a political thing at this point. But he kind of helps nudge people along. And so a lot of us, especially people kind of in the intellectual crowd, belong in this kind of phase 1 area, and they don't really get out of it. And that's okay. I mean, people on this stage basically will say anybody on a different stage is kind of a loony for like presuming too much too fast or believing too many things too fast. Well, on the flip side, I would say people on the phase 1 haven't looked at all the evidence yet, because just like some of these consciousness researchers can present a lot of good evidence. If I have to sneeze, my nose is just running right now. It's something, I don't know what it is that blooms in December in Los Angeles, but I get the worst allergies around Christmas time. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, so right, so there's a lot of consciousness researchers, but ultimately the afterlife is entirely theoretical, because you can't really learn what the afterlife is like by just saying the consciousness goes back to the universe. Some people like Tom Campbell may add some arguments and say, the afterlife is a mathematical place, the universe is a hologram, we all live in a simulation, all this kind of stuff, but it's still, basically we're in the highly theoretical category. Oh yeah, and people from the other phases will just be like, look, I mean, there's a lot of evidence you guys just aren't looking at, and knock on the door when you're ready to look at it. That's phase 2, which is the afterlife for real? So we have now we have people like Sam Pardia, who is objectively researching near-death experiences. Basically, going into NDEs might be the breaking point, because there's just too much of it. There's too much evidence around it to deny it. And this may come with like remote viewers, like legit psychics, and finding out that like consciousness outside the brain isn't just like the theoretical thing with like a little bit of evidence. There's actually real solid evidence. People are solving crimes with psychics. The James Randi Foundation is just a propaganda front. There's many people who could win that $1 million alive who wouldn't ever be able to, because it's just it's a disinformation campaign. Like this is kind of the red pill phase, when it's like, okay, there really is something going on here. The intelligentsia, the skeptics, these people are lying to all of us. And, this is, there might really be something going on. But it isn't the phase where there's any definitive answer what the afterlife is really like. You'll still hear people say, we won't ever know until we really die. And it's a phase where it's like, you're pretty sure something is still going on, but you're pretty far from believing that the other side is like a real kind of physical dimension like this one, you haven't swallowed that pill yet. Alternate theories may be used still, so some people in this phase may still be saying it's all a simulation. They may still be saying that like NDEs may be paranormal, but it's not literal. It may be like some kind of a pre-programmed event. A lot of like alternate stuff to kind of tiptoe around the idea that it's real. Phase 3 is what I call getting to the facts. At this point, you've accepted, okay, there must be an afterlife. These subjects must be real. but I need to figure out what's going on and begin looking at some other areas of evidence. See, they may dip into spiritualist lore, maybe check out places like Michael Tim's blog. You might study like the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg from the 1700s. Leslie Flint is a source where there is hundreds of hours of recorded voices allegedly from the other side that were being basically materializing into the room, describing what the other side is like. There's channeled works by Borgia and Silverbirch going to like the deep spiritual stuff to learn about literal conditions on that side, what it's actually like to die. And I'd say like with phase 3, like a lot of us in the Afterlife community are kind of in this phase. Like in the Afterlife Topics Facebook group, lots in this phase as well. And it's it's pretty far removed from the first phase because you're exploring areas of evidence that people like let's say as an example Joe Rogan never would. Like he'd openly deride, ridicule it because it's just so far removed from that reality. Even though, as an example, Leslie Flint was heavily tested by scientists. Another example I didn't put up is the skull experiments. The skull group, again, heavily tested by scientific research teams to confirm that entities were materializing into this room in England and communicating with people and providing information from other dimensions. This phase may involve piecing together the scientific principles. So you may begin looking into, scientific works that talk about multi-dimensions, connecting like concepts of like dark matter with other dimensions, connecting how other dimensions can fit into what the so-called afterlife is like, and you can making a lot of discoveries on that angle. Phase 4 is called Yep, I Know It's Real. This is typically when you begin having the personal experiences to confirm all the stuff you learned in the prior phases. As an example, you have an out-of-body experience, you meet a deceased loved one, and it's like, okay, now I know what's going on. Sometimes you've come to find that things are different than you had expected, especially if you can begin communicating with somebody from that side who begins answering questions, and usually what they say is pretty darn consistent with what they always say. But these are not things you would have normally taken seriously because it was before outside of your boggle threshold. Then you use personal experience to base other areas of information to determine what's real. So, with me personally, I'm in this category. This is the last category. And, it's almost at this point, like you either really get into the subject, you become like an author, some crazy person like me, or it's almost like you just accept it. It's like, well, there's an afterlife. Now I know it's real. All the stuff I learned is real. So I'm just going to keep living this life, and I don't have anything else to learn too much. I'm there, and that's good. So some people take that approach, and other people take the approach where they want to keep learning, keep expanding their information, keep expanding their education. Of course, that's more where I am. So those are the 4 phases. And so the issue that comes up a lot is that as somebody from phase 1, when they speculate about the afterlife, they're probably not going to say the same stuff that somebody from this phase is going to say. Somebody from phase 1 is going to say, well, if our energy in our brains release at death and we become pure energy, then, we must just exist as pure consciousness connecting to some kind of source matrix of life. And, they wouldn't really make an argument that there's any kind of like individuality or like a real alternate plane of existence. It's all going to be in this very speculative realm. And it would be a stretch to believe that somebody in this phase really believes in an afterlife, because it's more like a belief in some kind of a persistence of consciousness, but not the persistence of self. They may say philosophically, consciousness is everything, and when you die, you return to everything, and you could maybe they may dabble with reincarnation as a possibility, but this is like, it's pretty secular still. I mean, it's one step more than like materialist atheism, but it's a big step more. And just to be completely objective, the people in phase one probably would say that I'm wrong, and going off into these other phases is a mistake because it's being too credulous. And what these guys have to say, maybe that's the actual truth, and all this is bunk. That's all subjective. I know that's not true, but I'm not saying that you might believe the same that I believe. And for phase tours, again, descriptions of the afterlife may be heavily influenced by near-death experiences, but near-death experiences are not always the complete information. And people who are objective and critical minded may look at these near-death experiences and be like, the afterlife may be real, but it may be closer to what these people say at phase one, because we know that wouldn't make sense that Jesus could be in millions of people's lives at once. So why does some people see Jesus, other people see Buddha? There must be some kind of an illusion being created by some kind of higher self, and maybe it's not really an afterlife. So I hear that a lot by people in this phase. In phase three, it's like we're honing in on more facts, but phase three can go wrong if you begin listening to sources of evidence, but it's not really evidence. There's plenty of channelers and mediums who really are bunk, and you may totally start getting false information. Let's say, there's certain areas that go into the New Agey realm, which I don't believe in. I know some people do. There's the Urantia books, the guys who made that Celestial Seasonings tea. They also had a cult that believed in eugenics and that they were channeling extraterrestrials. I don't really buy that, but on someone's quest for knowledge, they may go into something like that, and they may discover things that I wouldn't be able to believe because I'm not at that level, or I'm not willing to go there. And in phase four, this is pretty special because when you let's say you have a near-death experience, you don't have to be debating the subject. You had it, it's all real. Then it's everybody else's problem if they want to catch up with what you know or not. So the final point here is that when discussing this topic, think about what phase somebody is at, especially on forums. So there's a lot of forums, and you can really tell. And this is probably why there's so much cohesion in this community, unlike, let's say, the UFO community, where everybody's at each other's throats. In this community, it's cohesiveness, and it's great. But you can usually tell how segregated it all is, and you have to sometimes dumb down what you're writing or alter it if you want to go to a different group. The Project Consciousness group on Facebook is this level stuff, quantum consciousness stuff, not so much afterlife, but afterlife stuff and NDE stuff tossed in. Afterlife topics and metaphysics, evidence for the afterlife, Afterlife Research Educational Institute. Those groups is phase 3, phase 4. So you have to figure out where you're at, and you can't hit people over the head with info. So you can't go to somebody whose source of information is Joe Rogan and Susan Blackmore and be yo, Leslie Flint used ectoplasm, the stuff from Ghostbusters, to materialize dead people through a voice box, and they'll just be you're effing crazy. So there's no point really in trying to hit people over the head with that stuff. And people in this phase, there's no point in these people telling people from this phase that they're nutcases. And fortunately, you don't see that too much because people do seem to respect each other's beliefs of different places they're at. So it's not cut and dry either. Somebody in this area may begin sharing links from friggin' Swedenborg or something. So it's not it's all cut and paste, but generally speaking, people go through these phases trying to understand the information. And I'm not one to say which phase is the ultimate truth, even though I know it's phase 4. what is my truth, maybe pretty different than what somebody on this level really truly believes. And having absolute belief is never a good idea because that's not scientific. So even at this level, I 99.8% believe in an afterlife, but there's like a 0.2% belief chance that this is all some kind of elaborate cosmic illusion. But I don't give a lot of weight to that because why obsess about something that the odds are so low that it's true? Like, if that is the case, I don't have to worry about it because I won't exist after I die, right? And I won't know that that's 0.2% was real. But in the event that that 0.2% is not true, which I'm positive is the case, then I'll have a really solid grip on what's going on once I die. So that's great as well. So what do you think? Post in the comments your journey on this, where you started. And again, if you like this stuff, please hit the subscribe button. You can check out my website, afterlifetopics.com. You can find books that I've written, like Understanding Life After Death. Join the classes, becoming a patron basically of this channel. $30 a month. We meet twice a week and go over a lot more topics than just this. And I'll see you all on the next video, which if I have the stamina to do so, I may do it tonight and have a quadruple upload.